My good friends, GoldenEye's slapper mechanic has had a new discovery this very year, and so has this cutscene rolling through the cast of characters. In honor of these, I wanted to share more GoldenEye facts that you almost certainly do not know, and in all likelihood do not need to know either. The most obscure of the obscure, stuff no one has seen on YouTube before, nor on their Nintendo 64s. So buckle up, grab yourselves a warm beverage, or cold one if you prefer, and here we go.
Here we go!
The slapper is one of the most iconic things in all of GoldenEye, so it's truly amazing that there's this new fact we've just learned about it nearly 30 years later. So here's the thing, on most stages you have the slapper as intended, just slapping around, you know the deal. We all thought this was funny, silly, and epic back in the day. However, on Surface 1 you start the mission with the sniper, and so when you switch to unarmed, you actually get the butt of the sniper rifle instead. You can also experience this on Dam since you can pick up a sniper early on, but these are the only two levels where you can get it through the course of intended, non-cheated gameplay. Of course, you can also get a sniper through the use of the All Items cheat, which you get for beating Egypt 00 Agent in under 6 minutes. So we can end up having the unarmed slapping sniper on all the stages. Now here's something that people may have intuitively suspected at some point, but as far as I know, it was never proven until recently. The sniper butt has a larger radius of slap effect than the plain-handed slapper. Yes, indeed, it's a truly stunning revelation. This has been demonstrated by our pal over at the GoldenEye Depot website by going into this corner of the depot stage with invisibility on and trying to slap this guard. He's just far enough away where your plain hand does not reach. However, with the All Items cheat on and the sniper butt slapper, you do indeed reach, proving this theory in action. Well, it's not even a theory, it's fact. And here's what GoldenEye Depot had to write about it. When you pick up the sniper rifle, your regular bare-handed unarmed attack is replaced with the butt of the sniper rifle. For almost 30 years, I thought this was a purely cosmetic change. That changed in 2026 when the code for this was decompiled. It turns out the sniper rifle actually has twice the melee range of the standard slapper attack. Without the sniper rifle, the melee range is 50 centimeters, and with it, the range is 1 meter. And he shows the bit of the code. And while amazing, in practice this has little effect on the game, only in very niche circumstances. Like from a speedrunning context, the only level where the sniper slapper comes into play is Surface 1 Agent, where we would sometimes slap this guard for the KF7 to use in the locks later. But you can just use the PP7 here, and it's just a matter of whatever groove you get into grinding the mission. You're not going to really compare slapping him with the plain hand because you never get it, just how you play it. And we don't pick up the sniper on Dam, though I suppose it could be beneficial in various challenge modes like DLTK max settings, slapper only, and their offshoots. But the thing is, we'd have already been playing like this without knowing it. One thing that I did wonder is like when you do get the paintbrush slapper, if it counts as the 1 meter range, it registers as the slapper sniper butt. And I think it probably would because it's trying to render the sniper, but just very odd, and I couldn't find a good corner to really test this in, the hand versus the sniper. If I do find one or a way to test it on Dam, I will do it sometime. And even in multiplayer, if you select slappers only, then there's no sniper around, so you'll just be using the plain hand. There actually is a snipers mode in multi, which is kind of crazy, so it could come up there if you were in some up-close battle and were out of ammo or whatever. But yeah, it's a pretty niche situation overall. The Snipers multiplayer mode made this very easy to test actually. You get into multiplayer, you get the snipers, you get into a corner or, find a spot where one person has the sniper and the other doesn't, and get yourself into a place where the plain-handed person can't reach the other person and try with the sniper, but it will probably reach them. So there you go, live in action, that's how it works. That's truly remarkable, unbelievable. Are you as amazed by this as I am? Alright, here's another recent discovery from the decompilation, again covered on the GoldenEye Depot. So you know this cinematic cast of characters that plays in the game. It plays either when you leave the main menu idling for enough time, or when you beat Cradle and click through to watch the credits. Usually you're not really paying attention to this, just kind of mashing away to get back into the gameplay, or skipping it if the game allows. But it can be kind of interesting to watch through and see all the various characters in different poses, holding different items, because that's what they do. You know, it can be funny sometimes to see the scientists or civilians holding a rare or powerful item, like the sniper or the AR-33, for example. But here's the recent discovery. There are actually some conditions that change what items can or cannot be shown during this cinematic, and this has to do with unlocking cheats in the game. So this is what we've missed for all these years. Of the game's 23 cheats you can earn, 20 of them are time-based, beat the target time, but 3 of them are not. Those 3 are getting the Cougar Magnum for beating Cradle Agent, the Moonraker Laser for beating Aztec Secret Agent, and the Golden Gun for beating Egypt 00 Agent. If you haven't unlocked these, the corresponding item will not show up in the cinematic. But if you have, then any character could randomly be holding one of the items. I watched through the cinematic a few times on a completed file, and I saw the Golden Gun being held by a few random characters, which is pretty funny and silly. Here's the piece of code that was only recently discovered in the decompilation, and yet just a funny and strange thing that no one really noticed until 30 years later, but something that does make a lot of sense as to why it was programmed that way. Here's a very obscure one having to do with the Japanese translation of the game and World War II history for all you buffs out there. And this is in thanks in huge part to our friend Who Was Phone 404, who has done unbelievable work with dozens of translation guides, among other things, over on Game FAQs. So on the statue level, when you encounter Valentin, he has this line about how you're about to meet Yanis and says, "Beware him, he's a Lien's Cossack traitor." However, in the Japanese version, Valentin just says, "Be careful," cutting out the Lien's Cossack reference. But my friends, who were the Lien's Cossacks? Well, this is of course very important in understanding why this line was cut from the Japanese version. Honestly, this gets a little convoluted, a little bit historical, perhaps I'm a bit detached from this side of the history over here on another continent. So here's the Wikipedia paragraph for the Cossacks, and trust me, this is actually important in the context of GoldenEye. The Cossacks are a predominantly East Slavic, Eastern Orthodox Christian militant people originating from the Pontic Caspian steppe of eastern Ukraine and southern Russia. Cossacks played an important role in defending the southern borders of Ukraine and Russia, countering the Crimean Nogai raids, alongside economically developing steppe regions north of the Black Sea and around the Azov Sea. Historically, they were a semi-nomadic and semi-militarized people who were allowed a great degree of self-governance in exchange for military service under the nominal suzerainty of various Eastern European states. Although numerous ethnic, linguistic, and religious groups came together to form the Cossacks, the East Slavs predominated, with other groups gradually coalesced and Slavicized, thereby adapting East Slavic culture, East Slavic languages, and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Well, look, that's certainly quite a lot, and I'm sure there's no historical or political baggage there. It's also important to know this part, that the word Cossack stems from the Tatar Turkic word Kazakh or Kozak, which means free man, but also conqueror. The ethnonym Kazakh is from the same Turkic root. Alright, so suffice to say, a nomadic, self-governing people with Cossack meaning free man were probably not too happy when Stalin rose to power. And likewise, Stalin probably wasn't too happy with this sort of nomadic rogue group of people in the broad Soviet territory he was trying to govern and install communism within. And so as in every war, alliances and allegiance can be complex and shifting and ever-changing, so some Cossacks did end up joining the Red Army and fighting with the Soviets, but others, when given the chance during World War II, chose to fight against the Soviets instead, and you can guess who that means they were fighting alongside in some cases. So, at the end of the war, many of the Cossacks who had fought against Stalin surrendered to the Western allies, especially the British and American ones, hoping for a better outcome than what they might expect if they surrendered to Stalin instead. There were also a few thousand Cossacks being held in a camp in Lienz, a town in Austria, hence the Lienz Cossacks. And look, I'm no World War II historian, but it might have seemed initially that the British were going to treat the Cossacks more fairly than how Stalin would, but pretty quickly the British decided to repatriate about 32,000 Cossacks in total, or just basically sent them back over to Stalin. This was considered a huge betrayal, hence the Lienz Cossack betrayal, and their ultimate fates went as you would expect for most prisoners of war under Stalin in the post-war period. And in the in-game lore, Trevelyan's parents were among the Lienz Cossacks, which is ultimately why he holds a grudge against MI6 and the British government, the government that turned his parents back over to Stalin and the Soviets. And this is a key plot point in the GoldenEye story, alluding to why Yanis Trevelyan turns heel against you, James Bond. I know. I played this game and the statue level tens of thousands of times in my life, and I never knew what this all meant until recently. I even watched the movie in the past few days too, and paid particular attention to this bit of in-world lore, and we can read more into it with a line said by Yanis after he unmasks himself and reveals himself to be Trevelyan, where the dialogue goes, "Bond, but why, Alec? I trusted you." Trevelyan, "Trust can be misplaced, James. My parents trusted the British government. They were betrayed with all the other Lienz Cossacks. I will have my revenge." However, in the Japanese translation, Trevelyan simply says, "Trust is an outdated word. My parents trusted the English government, but they were backstabbed by the English government. This is my revenge." So again here, the reference to the Cossacks, and especially the Lienz Cossacks, has been removed. I suppose this is, in all likelihood, because the Japanese audience really doesn't have the context to understand the Lienz Cossacks. They have their whole breadth of World War II history to remember and worry about on their own end. And furthermore, it's possibly as well because, the Japanese were kind of sort of on the same side in a roundabout way. But it's probably mostly the context thing. I mean, I didn't know about this chapter of World War II history myself, so I doubt Japanese kids did either. Every country has their kind of own lore or perspective when it comes to each war, and especially World War II. I don't know, are the Cossacks well known about and taught about in school to students in Britain when learning about World War II? They definitely were not here. But yeah, that's an interesting line that provides some insight into the translation differences between English and Japanese versions of GoldenEye. One more funny thing is that Valentin calls Bond Bond-kun when they meet. Any regular anime viewer or Japanese speaker might find this a bit funny, but it does make sense. The kun suffix is used when talking to someone more junior than you, like perhaps a student or a kid you coach in sports. Mishkin also calls Bond Bond-kun at some point. It's just not something you really expect to hear given how cool James Bond is, all in all, but it does make sense in a Japanese speaking of these characters. Can you beat any of the levels with no geometry or backgrounds? I found this GameShark code on the website of our friend over at GoldenEye Depot, and here's the code, and it results in this really surreal, unsettling version of GoldenEye where really none of the walls, floors, or ceilings are loaded in. Now at a glance, this does seem to be quite the challenge. I actually played around with it myself, and I was able to beat most of the game stages doing this. The guards are still there, so you can kind of use them as waypoints to the stage. The doors oftentimes are still there, and some of the objects. So I started out playing Dam, and I found this is actually pretty doable. The hardest part that you'll find on almost all the stages is actually the stairs, because the stairs aren't loaded in, and if you don't know exactly where the stairs are located, well, it can be kind of hard to figure out when you're going up or down, especially devoid of any walls or ceiling textures. But just knowing the game super well, I was able to play through and beat, the first few missions. I got to Surface 1, which was really a challenge, but somehow just by instinct and strafing around, I was able to kind of find my way to a cabin and use these as waypoints, eventually beating the Surface 1 stage. The other stages all kind of made sense. I did have a bit of a hang up on Silo when I kind of YOLO ran to the ending as, my old speedrunner habits, but with no walls or anything to really know where I was going, I ended up, taking a lot of damage and passing away. So I realized, okay, I gotta play this more carefully if I'm gonna beat each stage. Eventually, 2 stages where I ran into trouble were Surface 2 and Statue. Surface 2 should be doable just given the scope of being able to beat Surface 1. It's a pretty similar stage. You do have to have a bit better aim, you have to shoot out some cameras on Surface 2 Double Agent, but I think it could be doable if I tried a bit longer to play this. Statue, on the other hand, would take a lot of practice and instinct to do, because all of the statues, which can be used as like waypoints, obviously through the stage, are gone. And not only that, but if you don't really know where you're going, it's just so easy to get stuck on the edges of all of these things. Pretty much the rest of the stages I was able to beat, except for, again, streets. Streets seem pretty intense, hard to figure out exactly where you're going in such a vast open world, but I didn't really give it too much of a go. Anything else was actually not that hard. I even surprised myself by beating the target time on Train Double Agent and Caverns Double Agent on a first attempt, pretty smoothly going through the stage. Train has a lot of doors and objects which are loaded in, so it made it a little bit easier, or at least helpful that way. Caverns, the spiral was quite a challenge. That was just a pure gut instinct, rolling up the spiral and just feeling like you're strafing the right direction. Not many waypoints to guide you there, but eventually I made it up and carried on. Jungle worried me a lot because, I was wondering, would there be trees or anything on the stage to really guide me? Luckily, the trees are in, which I find so interesting, why the trees are treated differently than the statues' textures on the statue stage. But they were, and so jungle was not really too much of a problem either. And yeah, I made my way all the way to Cradle, beat Cradle, using certain strategies, and just a very, very surreal way to play GoldenEye. I still haven't tackled Aztec or Egypt, and again, the levels I didn't beat are Surface 2, Statue, and Streets. But hey, I was able to find my way through most of GoldenEye this way, which was pretty unusual. Again, here's the Game Shark code right there on screen if you want to try it yourself, if you have an EverDrive or a Game Shark, or, who knows, these other fancy things people use to play games these days. But yeah, let me know if you beat any of the stages I missed, and there's a very strange look at GoldenEye with no backgrounds, floors, walls, or ceilings. Are you up to this remarkable challenge? Lastly, I wanted to mention this amazing fact, again, that GoldenEye Depot dug up on the train stage. I've had a lot of questions and comments about the train stage recently on various platforms, which I find kind of interesting, and we'll get to those in a moment, but with the train stage, it has these breaks that you must destroy. It's a part of an objective, and you can't complete the mission otherwise. Now, you just shoot them out to destroy them. There's about 6 on the stage, I think, and that's it. It's that simple. But what's really interesting and unique about these breaks is that if you do not have a full clip of ammo, so you could reload by pressing B. If you're within the range of these breaks and you try pressing B, it won't reload. And this is probably because they programmed it in such a way, the breaks, where it's kind of like expecting you to do an action, like opening a door or pressing B somewhere else in the game. And so it thinks you might be activating something, or you could almost try to mess with them that way. Kind of like it's giving you the option of potentially doing something to the brakes, even though it was never programmed in the game. I guess another couple places where you can press B is deactivating consoles, for example, but also on Frigate with the diffuser. If you press Z, you gotta press Z to defuse the bombs on Frigate. If you press B, they blow up. And so there's kind of an unspoken action that can be played out on some stages. On Surface 2 as well, you want to destroy the communications link, but if you press B there, you end up contacting the 7-9 guards and failing the mission. So there are some cases where like pressing B is the wrong thing to do. And you kind of wonder if maybe at some point, even just a little message at the bottom of the screen would have come up like, oh, you cannot deprogram the brakes this way if you tried pressing B at them. But clearly there's some functionality in the game to like press B at the brakes that is just incomplete or does nothing. And what's even more interesting is that once you destroy the brake, now you can reload within the range of the brake. So like it clearly knows the brake's gone, now pressing B here is not going to matter, go ahead and reload. It's just such a very interesting little detail, such a niche thing, but hey, there you go, crazy thing to ponder. But then I've gotten a lot of people just asking me about the back rooms of the train recently, how to access them, how to get in there, why it happens. I've had a couple people even show me clips of it. And one interesting thing is this recent clip from a viewer, Valium, and he accesses the back rooms kind of by accident. But what actually ends up happening here is that Urmov, Natalia is unsuccessfully saved. And Urmov kind of runs away now that he's facing Bond. Runs into the back room right under where the rolling door cage thing is supposed to come down. So it's stuck on Urmov. And that gives you the time to then get in there and access the back rooms. Obviously, they're very strange back here and unusual. You can get back here with like walk-through doors, Game Shark, and EverDrive codes on, which I've done many times. But I certainly have memories way back in the day of getting here without that stuff, and as well as many other people have similar memories. And this is how it happens. Like Urmov has to get stuck right under the rolling door in some kind of like sidestepping or stand and shoot animation, which can provide you enough time to get back there. And so it kind of makes sense that before lots of footage was being recorded in the early 2000s, we didn't really understand exactly how this worked, but there it is, and that's one way to access it. Of course, these days with EverDrives and emulators, you can just walk through the doors with various Game Shark codes and make it easier. But this guard standing in the way of a roller door thing can also be manipulated on the other end of the stage, where we see this clip, and it's pretty funny that a guard here is blocking that rolling door from coming down. If you do no train, once you kind of activate the ending scenario, it rolls down at you from both sides. But you can actually prevent the other one from rolling down too and kind of enter the front of the trade even as the late stages of the level are playing out, which is a pretty fascinating thing to do. One more thing quickly, I have actually been posting content on Facebook and Instagram, so if you do use those platforms, I'm posting these short reels. Some of them are pretty silly and strange, others are, a little bit of quick hits of this similar kind of insight in GoldenEye and other N64 games. So if you want to check that out, if you use those platforms, you can find me at Gamer Folklore there as well. So there you go, just some more food for thought on the strange train stage, really one of the stranger ones in the game, at least with some of these mechanics. But hey, there's some more GoldenEye facts you certainly didn't need to know. A huge thanks for watching, and to all the Patreon supporters and channel members for your support of my work. Stay true, my friends, and I'll see you in the next stream or video.